Ed, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a moment. For those of you who are new to Moving the Rock, this is a conversation that we have every week about transforming leadership insights into growth momentum for sales organizations and businesses that want to take the lead and take control of growth, especially here as we're entering the fourth quarter and thinking about what this new year, 2021, is going to look like. Ed, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself, give our listeners a little bit of insight into where you come from, and that will lead us into the topic of our conversation today.
Yeah, certainly. So thank you for having me on. This is a topic that, James, you and I have talked about exhaustively for years, and I think that's why we align so well on a lot of the things, because we're very passionate in what we want to do and how we accomplish learning. So I'm here in the Columbus, Ohio area, and have been here most of my life. Went to elementary school, high school, and ultimately college here. I've worked here, spent a little bit of time in Dayton, but came back, found a wife, then came back. So I've been here, got a couple kids that are older now and making their way through college. So from the professional side of things, I've been on a lot of different sides of the customer life cycle. I started my career in the outsourced contact center space while I was actually going to school. It was a part-time job. I was doing phone work. It paid pretty well. I could have some flexible hours, and then found myself 8 years later still there in several different promotion capacities, ultimately overseeing multiple contact centers throughout the US, and had just a little over 1,000 people reporting directly into me throughout most of those contact centers. So that really got my attention in management, and throughout that journey spawned a journey for me on learning. And I often found myself in positions that I didn't know what to do or didn't know how to do it, and needed to figure out resources, whether that's people, whether that's books, whether that was case studies and articles. Excuse me. So that's how I built my journey in my first career, then went into a software startup and learned this thing called channel selling and what that was, and started to build my knowledge in that arena and figuring out how do you sell through channel partners and how do you get them to care about your product so that they can present it to their prospects properly. So that was a different level of sales that I learned at that point. Jumped over to building an inside sales team for a large field sales organization. Again, amongst a lot of learning, found myself often in times where I didn't really know the answers, didn't know what I was doing, and started to figure it out along the way, and built a very successful inside sales operation for a pretty large corporation. Then jumped to what I call a restartup. So it was a startup that had been around for about 5 or 6 years, and they were kind of looking at reinvesting and reinvigorating in their growth. So joined that company as a CRO and oversaw the full revenue organization, from marketing to sales to ongoing customer success. And ultimately, we sold the company last year. And for the past year and a half, I've been on my own helping clients throughout an array of different revenue organizations, be it marketing and messaging, sales and nurturing, and onboarding and ongoing customer support. So at the center of what I do has been, really focused on the customer and understanding what do they really want, what do they need, and how do you carry that same message throughout the whole life cycle of a customer. So that's what I focus on right now. It's what I work with clients on, and that's ultimately what brought James and I together. Right. And then talking about this topic, which is owning your own development, and how I've kind of taken that proactive step throughout my career.
That's awesome. Here's what I heard. I got my kids into college. I got some stuff at work done. No, I'm kidding.
No, it's true. That's very
My
true.
daughters are 14, 16, and 18. So I have mad respect for the impact you've had and all that you've done. But as I hear the college thing, I'm like, he's a god. Let me learn.
Yeah, right. Well, as much as I'd like to take credit, it's certainly a coin flip in these days. But, that's obviously what you want to do, is you want to see the kids successful so that you don't have to worry about it now, and see that they live a better life than you did.
Wow, man. Go you. That's so beautiful, Ed. Thank you. What got you so interested in the customer? Was there a tipping point where you're like, there's so many different directions you can go, so many different directions you go in sales. It seems like that's a real theme for you. Like they're just eminently interesting to you. What kicked that off?
There were really two parts to this equation. First was, excuse me, when I got my start in my career, when I was working part-time, I was on the phone talking to customers, and I used to always tell this to training classes in the future. I said, customers don't call you just to tell you you're doing a good job. They're calling you because they have a problem. And that's where we need to come from, that perspective. So when taking calls from all of these customers having problems, I started to realize throughout different clients and different situations that a lot of companies just don't care. And it's like we're subjecting customers to the downfalls of our own processes or our own technology. And it just became a constant annoyance to me that why do we do this when this could be an easy fix? And in major corporations, nothing is an easy fix. So that was kind of a starting point of starting to put the eye on the customer. Beyond that, when I became an adult and started becoming a customer, it got more and more frustrating that the simplest of things and the simplest of tasks were so challenging, and I couldn't understand why. Beyond price, there are plenty of other reasons why customers engage with a company, and there are reasons why I don't engage with certain companies today, and it has nothing to do with price. So throughout that time, it's really been a constant reminder for me that many companies get it wrong. There's probably not a whole lot that get it right. And that's kind of where I've started to care and to really give a damn, is about that experience and understanding the customer experience starts in marketing. When somebody doesn't know who you are and then starts to realize, well, who are you? What do you do? Then you start getting into the marketing aspect. Then that transitions into the sales experience. And how is that person treated during the sales process? Think about car buying. Nobody likes buying a car because the experience is terrible. It's awful. It's time consuming. It's a waste. It's negotiating. They're pressuring you to buy. It's ultimately one of the worst sales experiences, yet it's one of the longest running industries that we have. So those are the things that really start to grind my gears, if you will. And those are the things that I've kind of vowed to myself that I've been in the situation as a customer that I want to fix. And I think there's a lot of easy fixes along the way. And how do we align everything that we do to making this better or more impactful to a customer, whether it's sales or simply solving a problem in an ongoing service?
Yeah. It took me, you describing that feeling that you felt with other companies and people have felt with big corporations that can't make these changes, to a classic comedian, Brian Regan. He is so funny.
I saw him live. I saw him live. Yeah.
He's so good. I've seen him live a few times. Do you remember his bit where he talks about having to get his phone service turned on, and he's on the phone with the phone company and he's like, yeah, we'll get that turned on next week. He's like, well, what do you got to do? He's like, we got to flip a switch. And he goes, can you see the switch now?
I don't remember that one, but I do remember his one about checking into a hotel and not having the hotel reservation. And he gives him his name, and the person on the other at the receptionist, the front desk person, says, would it be under a different name? And he's like, yeah, why don't you try Boy I Oughta? Maybe I was thinking of it. Then he goes on this tangent about all these other possible names and spellings, and it's like it's the epitome of exactly what he talks about in that routine, as well as in that about the phone service. Is the simplest of things
becomes so hard and complex.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, and I think what happens, leaders, it's our job to take complex things and make them simple, whether it's sales or whatever we're trying to do. And when we've not done that work to make it simple, to make it elegant, to make it seamless, that's going to show up because there's going to be that experience that they have. And so I love that you know who Brian Regan is. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a powerful way for you to make meaning in your work. You're removing people's pain. And that's no doubt been a connector for you to, I think, sustain so much impact and motivation, because so many people lose heart. They don't get to the edge of their abilities because they can't make meaning. And I'm hearing so much meaning in what you described there. Jimmy, any things I'm going to keep going with too many questions.
Well, I think, it's interesting. I mean, we can go down a couple paths here, right? I know, Ed, you're really passionate about creating learning experiences for your peers, sales leaders. And I think it's really interesting where we started this conversation is the observation that you made, and then you actually did something about it. And then when you did something about it, it actually had an impact on the companies that you were working with. So it's not like this is an academic exercise. It's not like this is something that we read in a book and that we can aspire to, but just put it aside and not do anything about. It actually, it was something you went and learned more about and actually had an impact on the companies that you worked with, so much so that you were able to take one, you have a successful exit and have several successful experiences. So what is it, what could a sales leader or CEO now who's thinking now about this idea do themselves to create an environment for change? What did you learn about what it would take to create that kind of change inside the organizations that hired you?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll kind of tie this back to something you said, James, in a session last year when you hosted a meeting. Is selling is basically selling change, and how do you effectively communicate that? So when you live in a world of constant change, both not only in technology, but in now you're looking at different generations coming into the workforce and managing those. There's a big change there. Just overall change in thinking. The same company that's been around for 100 years hasn't thought the same or done the same. It may have the same core values, but they adapt along the way. So when I look at that, for me, I'm generally not somebody who likes to be bored. And whether that's at work or at home, don't get me wrong, I love a lazy Saturday when it's overcast like it is right now. That's enticing. But other than that, I like to be challenged, and I like to find new ways or better ways to accomplish things. I'm very intrinsically motivated by success, and that's helped drive me on my learning path. So when I started in management, I didn't know how to manage people. I just would manage them like I wanted to be managed. And you start to think about this whole golden rule, and almost the opposite is true. So you don't treat people the way you want to be treated. You treat people the way they want to be treated. And that's starting to really understand, how do you appeal to employees? How do you deliver what they want so that they're successful? How do you deliver to customers or prospects what they want? It's not a one size fits all. So when we start looking at change, it's really changing the perception and start to change the perspective of how you're doing things. So I took this upon myself to invest in my own learning. I knew that nobody else was going to do it. So I tried to find books. I tried to find resources. This is, again, back in the early 2000s. So podcasts really weren't a thing back then. Right. So books, articles that I could find on the internet, and going to conventions and shows that had different training topics. And I went to some of these conferences back then. Sometimes the company paid, sometimes they didn't. But when I would go, regardless, I would go with a plan. I would look at the agenda. I would see, kind of break down and start prioritizing which topics that I was more interested in, why. And then I created my own plan of what I was going to go learn, what are some of the things that I wanted to take back. And then at the end of the show, I had all of these notes, and I committed to making my own 30-day action plan of what was I going to research more about, what was I going to come back and change today in the operation, and then how was I going to continue that learning. So when I became higher in the leadership realm, I wound up imparting that same process into others that went with me. When I would send people to shows, this is my expectations. Let's prep for this. Let's talk about this as a development and learning opportunity. What did we learn? What things can we adopt from other industries that maybe we can take into our industry? So it became this journey of learning, but it started with a desire for it. And then the second is an internal accountability to myself, that I wanted to, if I'm going to spend time or money doing this, I want to get something out of it. Yeah. And ultimately, where do I go from here, and how do I put it into practice? And that's one of the things, like, I'm really against the grain on reading 100 books a year, because well, that's great, but what are you actually doing with that information? There's no way you have time to learn it and execute it. Now, if you're reading fiction books and or even nonfiction and looking for entertainment, great, no problem. But if you're reading business books or trying to learn a new skill, and you're reading so much of these, you just don't have enough time to adequately learn it, adopt it, execute it, and practice it. So those are the things that I've taken a little bit more of a formalized process. When I go read a book, I'm very diligent about highlighting. After I highlight, I take notes on a computer, because I'm not a great a great written learner, so I have to do it a couple different ways. So I put the notes in place. Then I start building kind of these execution plans. When I take teams through books and we do book club, it's a very regimented process. It's a chapter or two a week. We're going to have a meeting on the debrief. What did you learn? What are you putting into practice? And we start building kind of this process to implement or to not, or if the information is not something we want to do. But it's doing a lot more than say, hey, read a book or read 4 books a year. It's let's read these books. Let's make sure they're aligned with a skill that we want to improve, that they're not all over the place. And then let's start working on how are we changing our behavior, changing our actions, changing our activities to align with some of the things that we're reading or learning in the books or the podcasts. So that was really the journey that I took on my own professional development and how I wanted to invest in it. And there were some that I failed and some that were very successful, but ultimately I feel like I learned leadership from books. I learned about channel selling. I learned about inside sales teams, and I learned about this new organization right now called the revenue organization and what that means and what is the chief revenue officer and who does it wrong and who does it right. So these are things where I'm a constant student and continuing to learn so that I can be better and help other people in a productive manner.
Yeah.
I love how you navigated attention in what you shared between wanting to grow and learn. So you read books, but you're not over reading, but you're not in this other extreme where you're not learning. And I'm totally blown away when people complain about a problem. And I'm like, there's literally books that talk about how to do this.
Right.
Why would you not read it? But at the same time, yeah, it's like people get bothered and they don't take that step to prepare and change it. And then some people that take that prepare step and want to change it, they read like crazy, but they never execute it. And
yeah,
I love your system. Well, growing up or the last 21 years of public leadership, I would have a budget for our family and I would have usually expenses through the company or whatever. I've kind of been my own boss for a long time that I could use for development. But the rule is there's no budget for books, whatever we need. If anybody in my family ever wanted a book, I'm like, I'm freaking buying that right now.
Yeah.
I'll get it to the house tomorrow, and I was early to Amazon and Amazon Prime because that same idea, but then I would dog ear it. And then I would go back and underline if it still resonated with me. And then I would turn it into action plan. And I haven't heard anybody have a very extensive system very often. And so it's cool that you did that. And the way that you shape going to conferences, that's how you translate that inspiration into execution. And for too many people, it's just washing over them and gone.
Yeah. And I would even say the same thing is true with, even if you're exhibiting at a trade show, often the exhibitors are invited to all the sessions. Like, what a great opportunistic time to go learn more about your buyers. And it's not a time to just sit up your laptop and go work. It's go to the sessions. And, I didn't do that all the time, but those were plenty of opportunities to learn more about what your buyer cares about and go look at the sessions to say, hey, they're talking about this. My product helps solve this. I'm going to go learn what they're talking about. It's a great conversation starter. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when the way you describe it, it's like it's a cultural anthropology, which is exciting. I mean, you can go study people of the past and do archaeology and these older studies. You can also study people now. And when you're not overwhelmed with your own struggles, people become eminently interesting. How did you kind of navigate that? Because I think so many people, they're so consumed with their anxieties or their struggles or self-absorbed or their performance improving that they don't notice people very much. It seems like you were kind of early to maybe beat some of those battles.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I was early, I think, because I had some people in my life that kind of reminded me or took me off course that was good for me. So, I think one of the things that a lot of first leaders come into is ego. So you're now, you're a contributor or an entry level, and now you've got people that are reporting to you. At times there's a commonality that exists where you got a little bit of an ego trip going. That happened to me too. Now, granted, I was also 20 years old when this first happened. So I wasn't the most mature person. Today, I'm still not the most mature person, but there's age and then there's experience. So, I was fortunate to have some conversations with people that brought this to light. So that self-awareness is big. And I think I'm very fortunate that I learned some of this back then. I still struggle with it today at times. I love debating, and I don't consider it negative, but I like defending positions. And I think that's something that I'm genuinely enthralled with, is, understanding, communicating, and trying to not convince, but at least explain a position. Those are things that I enjoy. And sometimes that can take the line of,
Right.
oh, well, he always wants to be right. So there's still a little bit of self-awareness that I need to learn today. But ultimately, I've been fortunate to understand some of these shortcomings. And at some point, everyone else can't be wrong. If you're hearing it from 3 and 4 people, like, well, guess who's wrong? So, that comes with maturity as well. And that helps. So I'm now 40 and still learning about things like that. So I think that's probably how I became more on the self-awareness. Once I became aware, then the journey became a little bit easier. And then it's, okay, how do I fix it? Communication is a great example. I had a boss at a previous company. Actually, he wasn't my boss at the time. He was a peer at the time. He later got promoted. But as a peer, I asked him a lot for feedback on my communication. Hey, how did this email sound? How did I do on this conference call? And a lot of those things where I trusted his opinion, he was very open and honest, and he's very professional as well. So I sought advice and counsel from him because I trusted him as a coworker. So he helped. And those were things that, as I'm writing an email, how do I interpret that from the reader's perspective, not just from mine? When I'm on a conference call, how do I convey importance without conveying anger? And things like that are important. So again, I'll take this back to self-awareness, and that's a step. The other step, if in the event you don't have that self-awareness, or either you don't care or you don't know, either way, I think there's always opportunities to look inward to say, what skills do I want to develop? That could be something as simple as learning another language. It could be dabbling in HTML code. It could be learning how to edit graphics. Anything like that, when you start looking at skills, it's identifying that and then going to put a plan in place to try and learn it. So a skill, whether it's interpersonal or logical or even a functional skill, there's always a learning path. And how do you develop that learning path? And now we're at a point where we have complete freedom. We don't have to go to school, Monday to Friday, the same days, and go to subject every day. And now as adults, we can kind of create our own learning path and figuring out how do we learn best and what way works for us. So it's awesome. Still coming up with that plan, but it's got to be a starting point, whether you're aware of it or there's just a skill you want to learn. Either way.
That awareness is huge. And so a question to that, and I think everything you said is so helpful for people listening that are eager to learn. It's like you get the awareness, you start asking for feedback. I love those kind of conversations early on in my leadership when I would ask people, like, how did I do in that meeting?
Yeah.
Can you make someone eager? Can you teach someone to be eager to learn?
Can you teach them? No, but I think you can guide them. And that's, I think the difference is, I look at opportunities. So someone can, and I guess this kind of epitomizes, if you're familiar with Donald Miller or Story Brand, his company, he has a really good message that's, every Hollywood movie ever written follows a very simple framework from, you have a character who has a problem, who meets a guide, who works on a plan, helps them implement it, and that plan's either successful or a failure. And that's basically every storyline. So if you break it down like that, I think there's this opportunity where you can only do for somebody so much before they have to take the reins. It reminds me of a line in the Matrix movie that says, I can only show you the door, you have to walk through it. And so that's where I think you can certainly be a guide. You can certainly help instill that in other people, but at some point they've got to take it on themselves, which is why I'm very much an advocate for this whole topic of owning your own development and, try and seek that upon yourself. Not to say that you can't have somebody that influences you, a mentor, somebody you look up to, a role model, whatever the case may be. I think there is a good opportunity for people like that to help develop that skill within other people, But again, at some point they have to not rely on that person and go on their own route.
Yeah, and everything we're talking about here, it's really interesting because everything we're talking about here really stems from something we haven't really overtly observed yet. Everything you've done, Ed, in your career, you taking the initiative, you creating the self-awareness, you searching, discovering, seeking to be better. I haven't yet heard you say that it was that you looked for approval, or you sought approval, or you did this in the context of the framework the business you're in created for you, right? I think so many folks, when they think about change, they think about changing in the context of what's approved or authorized or allowed or acceptable in the organization, instead of kind of like breaking out of that kind of invisible framework or those limitations that they perceive to be there, and just doing what inspires them, and then come what may. I guess I wonder how much of your experience was purposefully that, how much of your experience did you pursue with that on purpose, or how much of that was just maybe innate or intrinsic in who you were?
Excuse me. Yeah, I would say the overwhelming majority is it was a learned trait. So I compare working, the work life, to professional sports, and sometimes it's not an adequate comparison, but in many respects it is. And you look at these professional athletes who are getting paid to do a job, whether they're the LeBron James or the guy riding the bench every game, regardless, they're getting paid to do a job. And I think you don't see these athletes just showing up for practice, required practice, and games. You just don't do it. You see them doing their own workouts. They're at the gym. They're in the off season. Some of them, maybe more regimented and rigorous than others. But these people don't need a kick in the butt. These people don't just show up from 9 to 5. They don't just come in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and do the job. They don't expect to be paid to learn. They want to be better so that they can market themselves better. And this is why Tiger Woods, to this day, still has a coach that he pays for. And granted, his performance hasn't been the best over the years, but throughout his whole time, by and large, one of the top golfers still has a golf coach and still pays for it. So who pays for that? Do you think his sponsor? I guess indirectly, his sponsors pay for it, but he's coming out of his pocket. So you got someone on the top of their game. You look at LeBron James. He's there before everyone else most of the times in practice, shooting free throws. He's there after. If you saw that story about Michael Jordan and the Bulls that just came out on Netflix, I mean, it's extremely inspiring. You talk about someone that's at the top of their game, but is constantly finding opportunities for them to get better, whether it's a layup, whether it's dribbling left-handed, whether it's a free throw. You can apply this in a lot of different areas, but as it applies to a sales rep or a customer service rep or a sales leader or a marketing leader, there's nothing different there to say you can expect to only show up during work hours and be paid for that, but just know you're limited. Don't expect that you're going to get the promotion. Don't think you're entitled to it. So I grew up playing sports, and I was very much that way. I started teaching myself how to pitch when I was 8 years old. In my backyard, we had a barn, and my dad brought a giant block of wood that I could put up to it, and he drew a strike zone, and I measured a pitching mound, and I was out there throwing sometimes when it was rain. But that's because I wanted to get better before a practice or a game. And I think that's where it started for me, where it was just synonymous with, hey, if I want to get better, I got to figure out ways to do it. So I wouldn't say I necessarily learned it as much as I built it throughout my youth, and it was kind of an expectation for me. I'd like to say that I'm shocked, but the more people I talk to, especially in work environments that don't do this, it's a little bit mind-blowing to say, especially sales positions, is how much of your compensation resides on your performance and your individual performance. A lot of it. Don't you want to hone that? And those are the things that I start kind of taking a step back to say, well, now let's look at the buyer perspective. Let's look at that person. Has anybody shown that person? And maybe they're 30 years old and they should know, but maybe they don't. So how do we take it back, and how do we start crafting that? Kind of like what we talked about earlier of, you can kind of guide them a little bit, give them a little bit of boost, give them some support, and see how they go with it. So to tie that back around to your question, James, is asking for permission or budget. I think in some regard, if you can get budget, wonderful. But if you can't, it shouldn't be a limitation. There's always outlets. Now, more than ever with the internet, you now have podcasts, you now have blogs that you can subscribe to. There's people on LinkedIn. Content is everywhere. If you can't find content for something that you want to learn, then then you must be in a real niche area. But otherwise, it's out there, so go get it. Now you can start coupling that to try and see there are opportunities where employers will pay for conferences or training or certifications. So there's opportunities there, but I certainly don't think that should be a limitation. It should be, if anything, an augmentation of what you're trying to do. And it's kind of less about what's approved and what's not versus what do you want to do to get better, and kind of think about that in the pro athlete story to say, do you feel like it's a requirement for you to be in tip-top shape in order to run back and forth on a basketball court? Do you feel like you got to be in shape to go give 100% every play in football or hockey for long periods of time, or soccer? These are all sports that require a lot of endurance. And do you feel like in order for you to perform better, do you need this? Then maybe that's a good catalyst or a stepping stone to take it upon yourself. So I think especially as you get into new positions, you get promoted or you get into another cross-functional role, that's the first opportunity to say, immerse myself in what can I learn right now to give me a quicker onboarding so I can become more successful.
That's awesome. Have you taken the Myers-Briggs personality test before?
Yeah, several times.
Are you ENTJ?
Yes.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, I want to hear what you're going to say too. So I know there's difference of opinions on the, how, effective Myers-Briggs is a typology, but I mean, in a beautiful way, you're a small part of the population. I'm not limiting you down to ENTJ. I'm a mix of I and E, depending on phase I'm in, where I'm taking the test, but definitely NTJ. And that NTJ function is innate, but it can get distorted.
Yeah.
And you, in a good way, me too, fully activated it, leaned into it. And so you're constantly confused and going, why don't people want to go change their lives? Like you're asking that question, like, why wouldn't this person whose income is dependent on something, why wouldn't they go learn? So props to you, the way that you've gone after it and cultivated it. That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So the first time I've taken that a couple times, more so out of curiosity to see if it's calibrated properly. But I remember the first time, it really brought, the person that took me through it was an employer that I worked with, but it was a consultant they hired to administer some certain things. So it was that third party person that was the educator that kind of told me about what the results were. And I was probably 24 at that time, 24, 25. And that's kind of what my first starting point was, understanding, oh, well, people don't operate the same way I do. And starting to understand that, oh, I guess people are really different. And I would start to realize that my expectations of other people were higher than they actually were. And it's not to a detriment of another person. It's just simply a misaligned expectation. And even today, my wife tells me this, not regularly, but pretty regular enough, that sometimes that, don't expect too much from other people. If somebody doesn't call you back or somebody doesn't write you back, it's not you, it's just, that's not them. And there's a little bit of difference there. So that expectation alignment, and it's tough for me to think about it for myself. It's easy for me to point it out in other people when I say, well, give them a few more days, or, well, you might not have communicated in a way that they understood what you were asking for. So I'm very easy to pick that up on other people. It's not always easy with myself, but that's certainly the expectation aligning when I first kind of became aware of that it's a little bit more on me to make sure that I'm aligning with them and not expecting them to align with me.
Right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, that's been a flaw for me in sales. Early on, I want you to react to my vision rather than understanding how you hear this. And that's classic INTJ failure to understand that. And I can remember being 25 and I was managing a team, way too many people for myself, I think 10 or 11. And they, I mean, and I pushed too hard. I was immature. And I can remember one of them crying because he was just too much to do. And on the inside, I'm like, I only told you 3 to 5 things. I have a list of 9 or 10 for you to do.
Right.
You know? And so props to you for the awareness. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah, thanks. It's come over time. That's for sure.
Well, you know, what I love to do in the time we have left, Ed, is kind of bring this full circle, right? So the conversation today is about this idea of investing in yourself, investing in your learning. And I'd like to talk about Carrot and the things you're doing now to actually activate, this idea and put it to work for the community, a special community of sales leaders and folks that are out there looking to seek and drive growth for their businesses. Can you kind of give us some insight into what you've got planned and what's coming up in 2021?
Yes, certainly. So again, it kind of started with where I've gone in my development journey. I seek out associations, network groups, things of the sort where I can connect with people, learn from people. I'm in several sales groups, both micro communities as well as larger associations. I volunteer as a mentor in an organization called Girls Club, which is an amazing organization helping to provide more tools and training for women in sales leadership positions. So these are things that I've sought out. And it was about 2 years ago when I found out about a group here in Columbus that was the Columbus SaaS Roundtable. And it was just a group of people that were involved in the SaaS world, which is kind of a bigger world here in Columbus and a booming startup community where people would come together and talk about just different things. So I wound up going into that and talking to different people. And one of those people who had founded that group, we had started talking about, hey, there's some meat and potatoes to what you're doing. And I think there's an opportunity to monetize that. And I started talking about some of the networking groups that I'd facilitated in the past on behalf of an organization called Tech Columbus, which is now Rev1 Ventures. But back then they had executive groups. They would have groups of CFOs, CEOs, HR leaders, contact center leaders, innovation leaders, CIOs, all of these kind of micro groups that were built on connecting each other and helping each other with real world problems and sharing some information and insight. So I hosted a few of those years ago based on what Josh was doing with this SaaS, the Columbus SaaS group. We started talking about how can we make this relevant and almost rebuild and differentiate a little bit from what Tech Columbus did. So started learning about these peer-to-peer mastermind groups, what they are, how they're organized and constructed. And really we started working on this. And it's been certainly a little bit of a work in progress as we've both had full-time jobs. And we're now kind of committing to ourselves to get this off the ground next year. So Josh and I both knew James, and again, kind of with a lot of your how you view sales and leadership and development is very well aligned with us. We wanted to start a mastermind group, and I think we have a vision of where this wants to go, which is applying to any discipline and any position. But ultimately, we're starting with sales leaders, so people who are charged with and responsibility for sales, and we're bringing a small group together, orchestrated with some external content and speakers, facilitated by James, and with the goal of really looking at and examining each member's where you're at with your business, where do you want to go, what challenges are you facing. We start to gather all of that information up front, and then that's how we'll curate the content for every meeting that we meet. And it's, there's a lot of these, we're not doing anything different from a mechanism because there's a lot of these out there. But what I feel we're doing drastically different is we're taking a lot of the member data to try and align that to the content that we're bringing in. And over time, the more groups we have, the more people we have, we can start analyzing that data to say, are we solving the problems that these people come into the group that want solutions for? Are we effectively doing that? Are we curating the best types of content? Are we bringing in the best speakers? Are the members learning, and are their businesses thriving as a result? So I think that's where we're going to start to center on doing some things different. But we're hoping to get that group going up and running next year and get this pandemic out of our way and start for the races here. So I'm excited because it fulfills a passion of mine, which is learning. And the more I've talked to sales leaders, again, I realize not everyone's like me. Some people don't value that kind of learning, and there's no shame or no harm in that. It's just not quite for them. And it's finding those people who are interested, and hopefully we can corral a group of those people and then start building that from the ground up.
Yeah, I know that, and I love the mission, love the vision, love the sincerity with which you and Josh have built this thing and designed it. And I also love the connection to kind of the learning that Chris and I have that learning journey that we've been on, right? Chris, we talk a lot about this idea of content coaching and community. And I love the connection back to the community that you're looking to create with Carrot. How does that resonate with you, Chris, in terms of, what we talk about?
Totally. I mean, just affirming that, the best model that I know of for impact and leadership is to know who you are, to bring that into a mission and build a community around that mission.
Right.
That's it. And you're modeling that. But then B, you're taking your desire to learn and get people connected to world-class practices and resources, which of course, Jimmy and I are so passionate about and connected to. I mean, I'm in my heart and mind going, ooh, I wonder if they've got this covered. I wonder if they're doing that. I can tend to be so passionate about what we do. Jimmy, I was like, not that you wouldn't, but like, hey, we're here. We'll help, because it's so powerful to be a part of moments when people's light bulbs click on. And when they bring some thought into who they are, how they show up, it's so powerful, because the world is changing so much, and it's only going to keep changing. It's only going to accelerate. Sales is never going to be the same. And what's it look like to get a community of people around together, dedicated to being the best they can be? Those are the places I like to hang out.
Yep.
That in my backyard on my patio.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a deck guy, but with the weather here and raining and cold, now it's getting cold, we wound up buying a heater, so we're gonna put that out there. We've got a fire pit, so we're ready for the cold weather. Just don't have a solution for the rain yet.
So Ed, this has been great, man. What a wonderful conversation. For those who are listening and want to learn more about what you're doing, how would they find out more or get a hold of you?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm all over LinkedIn, Ed Porter. There's not a whole lot of Ed Porters. If you Google Ed Porter, you're going to get a council person from California, someone in politics, a photographer, and then me. So I am neither the politician nor the photographer. But if you just go on LinkedIn, it's Ed Porter. That's where I'm most active. Our website for Carrot is up. It's joincarrot.com, and Carrot is spelled C-A-R-E-T. So joincarrot.com. There's a little bit of info about that, and we're again looking to get this kicked off next year. So would love to connect with anybody. And my one pet peeve that I try to communicate as much as I can is, if you're going to connect with me, please put a note in there and say, hey, heard you from the Moving the Rock podcast. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I value a lot, and this came up in Myers-Briggs as well as in another survey, is I value relationships. And some of the things that I pride myself on is the people that I'm connected with, which is not that many. I think I'm barely at 1,100. But I would bet with about 95% certainty, you could say a name and I could tell you where I met them and some things about them. And I do that because I'm not an open connector with everybody, but I like to know where I met people or how we had conversations, how we got connected, if it was from another referral. And it's not like my memory is worth a damn or anything. It's just, these are the things that I start learning and understanding, and I'm a visual person. So if you do that, help me out. It'll certainly help me out on how we met, and I'd love to stay connected with as many people as I can in the revenue world.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris, any last words?
No, other than I'll stalk you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. All right.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening today to Moving the Rock. I'm your host, James Rory, is my co-host, Chris McAllister, and our special guest today, Ed Porter. Thank you all very much. We look forward to next week. Take good care.
Thank you, guys.